Welcome back. Last time we went over several different theories about autism. Today we are going to go over autistic led online forums. As the web started to grow, online forums evolved along with it. There were many different ways to connect with people online, whether through instant messaging, email, IRC, or online forums. Autistic people were on all of them. Notable social media platforms like MySpace, LiveJournal, and Facebook were in their infancy. There were several forums that were by and for autistic people. I already talked about Yahoo groups and ANIL, but there were more communities than that. One of which being Aspies for Freedom. Aspies for Freedom was started in 2004 by Amy and Gareth Nelson. In their own words, this is unlike any AS autism site you have ever seen before. We do not view autism as being negative or necessarily a disability for everyone on the autistic spectrum and should be recognized as part of who the individual is. To this end, we oppose any attempts to cure someone of an autistic spectrum disorder, such as Asperger's syndrome, or making any attempts to make them normal against their will. We aim to oppose all forms of discrimination against Aspies and other autistics and work to bring the community together both online and offline. So their values are clearly aligned with the neurodiversity movement in the sense of being anti-cure and for recognizing autism as an inseparable part of one's being. However, note the wording here. They say that they do not view autism as a disability for everyone on the autism spectrum. So who are they saying it is negative or a disability for? Why are they trying to say that some autistic people don't have a disability? I think they view disability as a negative thing, but autism not as a negative thing. Though I think there's some real danger in trying to deny autism as a disability, which we will really see the repercussions of in a bit. If you go on the web archive and look through their forums, you can see plenty of instances in which people talk about how Asperger's is better than autism. This not only throws non speaking autistics and autistic people with intellectual disabilities under the bus, but it also props so called Aspies up as superior. This is known as Aspie supremacy. Now, Aspies for Freedom is the first known instance of the rainbow infinity symbol being used. That symbol is preferred by many autistic and otherwise neurodivergent people, even now. I think it's pretty neat, and it's a better symbol to use than the puzzle piece. However, I do think there are some flaws in its origins. That isn't to say it's inherently bad, though if I am going to argue that the puzzle piece is harmful because of its origins, I should at the very least look at the rainbow infinity symbol's origins to give a fair and balanced view of the discourse. And the fact that it was created by people who seemed intent on elevating autistic people with an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, I do think it is valid to be critical of it on that front. I also think that the use of the infinity symbol has indeed evolved over the years, while the puzzle piece not only has problematic origins, but problematic use across its history. So, yes, I still prefer it. There are also people who have appropriated its use for causes that are not part of the neurodiversity movement as a way to pander to autistic people, though I feel that this was inevitable. Aspies for Freedom also created Autistic Pride Day, which has been observed on June 18th of every year since 2004. I think this is a good opportunity to celebrate the parts of being autistic that bring you joy, or whatever community or sense of belonging you may have found from being autistic. One important thing I should note, however, is that the pride and rainbow are adopted from the LGBT plus community, which is fairly obvious. Though Amy and Gareth are straight and cisgender, I certainly get what they are going for, and I think the aesthetic fits the neurodiversity movement, but I also think it's strange that people who are not part of the LGBT plus community lifted something from it. When Laura Dosanchik adopted the Liberation Front idea from the Gay Liberation Front, she did that as someone who was gay. The autistic community had borrowed plenty of other things from other marginalized communities, though it's often for a specific purpose, like borrowing Flap Don't Clap from the deaf community, another disability subcommunity, because it accommodated the sensory needs of many autistic people. Now, yes, Many neurodivergent people, of course, including autistic people, are LGBT plus, so it doesn't feel terribly out of place. But the fact that it was borrowed by straight cis people, I think, is at least worth mentioning. One thing Aspies for Freedom did in particular was lobby the United Nations to include autistic people as a minority group. This campaign was not successful, though I think it's worth analyzing. I'm gonna click on the link here. Never mind. Okay, so I can't click on the link, but uh, I'm gonna just talk about what it says. So they talk about how autistic people have their own social network and language and communication, how harmful intensive therapies can be, and they even mentioned the Judge Rotenberg Center. There are some really good points made here. However, I also am not sure it was necessary to ask for the UN to do this. Would this have feasibly protected autistic people from any abuse? Why didn't they build a coalition with other disability subcommunities to protect the rights of all people with disabilities? I think there are better ways to ask for basically the same things they were requesting here that are more thought through than this appears to be. I do, however, like what it said about autism being genetic, autistic people being valid as they are, and the dangers of cure rhetoric. Aspies for Freedom was featured on a shirt in a claymation movie about autism called Mary and Max. I just thought this was a neat little tidbit. I think overall, Aspies for Freedom was a decent way of having autistic people organize and mingle, and I think the biggest sticking points of it were the rainbow infinity symbol and Autistic Pride Day. Though I also think there were many issues that came from it, which was symptomatic of greater issues within the neurodiversity movement, mainly in regards to Aspie supremacy. I also think they could have been better at organizing and strategizing. The forums are no longer active, however, their instant messaging channel known as Chat Autism is. Another notable autism forum from this time is Wrong Planet. Wrong Planet was created by Alex Plank in 2004, the same year as Aspies for Freedom. It was another online space for autistic people to gather and interact. Alex Plank is a filmmaker and actor and comes from a fairly wealthy family, so he's able to start an autism forum with quite a bit of reach. The concept of autistic people being aliens from another planet was certainly not a new metaphor, though I do think the alien aesthetic is admittedly kind of cool. However, I cannot ignore the controversy that has come from Wrong Planet. For one, Alex hosted a vlog under Wrong Planet called Autism Talk TV, which was sponsored by Autism Speaks. It also featured interviews with several executives at Autism Speaks. It was and still is considered taboo to collaborate with Autism Speaks in most autistic circles. And this decision was questionable, not just because of who they were collaborating with, but also because Plank had previously uploaded videos that were critical of Autism Speaks, and there's even a video of Wrong Planet members confronting the founders of Autism Speaks. So how they went from clearly being against Autism Speaks to openly collaborating with them is beyond me. That isn't the only controversy with Wrong Planet, though. Wrong Planet also has a reputation for being ground zero for Aspie supremacy, misogyny, and even fascism. It's very common for people to list what their level of autism is by many users on Wrong Planet, and the forums are dominated by white cis straight men. This leads to a lot of very awkward conversations about social issues that show many of the users lacking a critical eye on them. Uh, Several autistic women and non binary people have spoken out about being mistreated on Wrong Planet, and while I do not know any specific anecdotes, I, I am sure that um, I am sure that autistic people of color have faced racism on there too. You will find plenty of users on Wrong Planet, either from years past or even now, that hold views associated with the far right. Why all of this behavior is allowed on this site, I don't know, but my guess would be that it has to do with the moderation or lack thereof. I I have already spoken quite critically of autistic-led forums that uphold and upheld viewpoints I find to be problematic. However, There is one more I want to mention, which is somehow worse than anything I have mentioned yet. Asbergia. Asbergia was an online forum created in 2002 that described a fictional land devised by autistic people to be a lost civilization a la Atlantis, where autistic people used to thrive. It describes autistic people with an Asperger's diagnosis as an ethnic minority and mutants with special gifts who are descendants of Aspergia. They specifically want to frame Asperger's this way. They wanted to reframe Asperger's, though not as a more inclusive diagnosis, but rather as a superpower. Autistic people were Aspergian mutants, according to them. Now, according to Meg Evans in a chapter she wrote for Autistic Self Advocacy and the Neurodiversity Movement, Asperger's forms were accepting towards autistic people, regardless of specific diagnosis. I personally believe it was pretty clear what kind of autistic person they wanted to elevate above others, though. And even if this was inclusive of all autistic people, it still implies that autistic people are superior to non autistic people, which I think is also a harmful notion. Interestingly, Aspergia predates Aspies for Freedom and Wrong Planet, and the founder of those forums created them after being part of Aspergia. Aspergia closed its servers in 2004, which led to the creation of those other forums. So, given that this is where they came from, it's not surprising to me that Aspie's supremacy persisted in the newer forums. The whole idea that autistic people are an ethnic minority from a lost society is so incredibly far removed from not only reality, but from the disability rights movement. Discussions about Aspergia persisted in forums for years to come, though the concept seems to be all but dead in the modern age of autistic organizing. And I think that is mostly a good thing. I don't want to knock anyone who legitimately had a good time on the Aspergia forums, who may have found a sense of belonging from them, perhaps now a sense of nostalgia nearly 20 years later, though I am highly skeptical of the concept itself. So those were the forums. Next time we're going to conclude by talking about both the misbehavior of behaviorists incident and the founding of Autism Speaks and the Autistic Self Advocacy Network. So I'll see you next time.